The manhunt for a mentally ill mass shooter in Maine comes to an end. Plus, VCDL President Philip Van Cleave gives his outlook on the upcoming Virginia elections. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com and a CNN contributor. And you can head over to The Reload right now if you want to sign up for our free weekly newsletter and keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America. We send you one email a week that gives you all the best stories, stuff you won't find anywhere else. And if you want to take a deeper dive than that, you can also buy a membership, which is how we fund ourselves here at The Reload. And that's what helps keep us going. It also gives you access to exclusive content, analysis pieces, early access to this podcast, the opportunity to appear on the podcast, the member segment, and all sorts of other things. So head over and check out those options today. This week, we are just taking a look at the Virginia elections. I know if you don't live in Virginia, you might have forgotten that Virginia has off-year elections. We do things. I'm in Virginia, up in Northern Virginia, near Alexandria, and we do our elections different years than everybody else does. So we are having our election coming up next month. Then it will decide control of the state legislature. The entire body is up for election. The governor's not up, but the House and Senate are both completely up. So pretty big election with a lot of consequences, most likely for gun policy in the state, which is why I have with us today the president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League, which is one of the major gun rights groups here in Virginia, Philip Van Cleave. Welcome to the show, Philip. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Can you tell people a little bit more about VCDL?
Yeah, the Virginia Citizens Defense League was founded back in late 1994, back when Virginia was what was called a May issue state, where a judge could turn you down for a concealed carry permit for whatever reason he chose. Some people weren't given permits because they were women. Some weren't given them because only women needed guns. It was a hodgepodge. We said, bad enough you got to ask permission to carry a gun, considering the Second Amendment's out there. So we formed to fix that. In the first year, in 1995, we got the law changed to be a shall issue state where they have to give you a permit. And we get bills introduced every year supporting the right to keep and bear arms. We kill the gun bills as best we can, and usually we're very successful at that, except for 2020 and 2021, where we managed to mute the bills but not stop them. And we're also a watchdog, looking out for localities, for example, violating state law by putting up gun bans that they can't legally have, things like that. And we also educate our members to make sure that they're aware of all the gun laws and what's going on around them, so that we can be a successful grassroots organization.
Right. And speaking of 2020, that may be, for people who don't follow Virginia politics closely, an event where they may have actually heard of VCDL, because you guys organized the massive protest in Richmond during that session, which did apply a lot of pressure to the legislature and probably ended up getting rid of the assault weapons ban that had been proposed. But as you mentioned, a number of policies did get through. Universal background checks, red flag laws made it through in that session. Republicans have since taken back the governor's mansion with Glenn Youngkin. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of him, at the very least, even if you don't follow Virginia politics, as he's a well-known Republican at this point. And they have control of the House of Delegates as well, but not the Senate right now. So you've got a split legislature at this point, which means that gun policy hasn't moved much since 2021, right?
Right. And we do have the attorney, also the attorney general and the lieutenant governor positions. Now, lieutenant governor could influence a tie in the Senate, but we didn't have any ties she could break recently. But she was
because the Senate's at a 2-vote majority for Democrats right now. Correct?
Right now it is, yes.
And so this election is pretty high stakes then. You know, these margins are pretty razor thin at this point. I think Republicans have a 4-seat majority in the state house, and then Democrats have a 2-seat majority. The governor's not going to change, so Republicans will retain that for now until the next gubernatorial election in 2 years. But that means the outcome of this election could be pretty significant, correct?
Oh, absolutely. This could allow us, if it goes well, to repeal and roll back all the bad stuff that happened in 2020 and 2021. Especially one of the things that people hate the most in Virginia is local gun control. We had strong preemption before 2020, and that got weakened. And so 17 localities in Virginia now have their own local gun control. They're banning guns in parks and recreation centers and government buildings at permitted events. By the way, we sued one of those localities and they lost over parks and permitted events. But that's a long battle. It's better to just repeal that law and put it back the way it was in 2019.
And we'll definitely get to more of those policy changes that you foresee on either side of the outcome of this election. But first, let's look at the election itself, right? We got razor thin margins. There's going to be a couple of races that ultimately decide control of the state legislature, I'd imagine. So what are the key races for you guys? Which races are you looking at as the deciders?
Well, there are several. One is Senate District 1. Most of the races we're concerned with are in the Senate. We think that's the area where we really need to tighten up and get a majority in that Senate. That's one. There's another one that we're watching that's in Northern Virginia. Another one that we're watching is sort of in the Tidewater area, and that's the 24th Senate District between Danny Diggs, who used to be the sheriff of York County, and then Monty Mason, who's currently in the General Assembly, who's a Democrat. Danny Diggs has always been very solid on guns. So that's a race that we're watching to see what will happen there.
Okay. So those are some of your key races.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so really, it really is going to come down to just a couple of these Senate seats, really.
Yeah. There's like four of them that we're watching carefully, but, you just never know with these elections. And the problem is people don't take these off-year elections seriously as they should. If the president's not being elected, then why do we need to show up? Well, boy, you better show up. It's a lot at stake here.
Yeah, certainly. There were just a couple of polls that came out this month about the not these specific races, but the race overall that looked at issue prominence, and guns have ranked fairly high. The Washington Post had a poll that came out. I think they were 4th in that poll as far as issues go, behind things like the economy and inflation. And but I think actually the Washington Post had it above abortion, which is a bit surprising. But I think CNU's the Wilson Center, they had a poll as well with similar findings of in terms of issue importance. It's not the top issue in the race, but it's one of the top issues, I would think you could fairly say. So it does seem like gun policy is going to be a significant part of this equation here. Are you feeling that on the ground?
Yeah, I am. Gun owners are fed up with all the bad stuff that we've been dealing with for several years now. And I think that hopefully they're going to be motivated to get out and let's get this thing fixed. If you look at the elections that happened for the House when it was up a couple of years ago, that took the House was taken away from the Democrats. They controlled the House and the Senate in 2019, 2020, and 2021. The House was taken away. The Senate wasn't up. So there's no way to rate what would have happened had the Senate been up as well, like it is this year. So I think that's an interesting indicator there, probably, of the sentiment on this issue.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, right? You had a lot of energy, obviously grassroots energy, back in 2020. It feels like a lifetime ago because that was like one of the last big political things before COVID happened. But you had a lot of grassroots energy, and it did seem to turn into electoral success for Republicans at the time, but it has been several years now. Do you think that energy is going to remain?
That's what's hard to predict. I think to some degree there's a lot of lethargy in the state, but it seems to be everywhere. I don't know if it's all the people went through with COVID. That I don't know what it is, but we're hoping that gun owners stay as motivated in 2023 as they were a couple of years ago to try to get things turned around.
The Washington Post poll does have Republicans winning on this issue by a slim margin, but they do have them ahead on gun policy, who voters trust to handle gun policy better. So, it does seem that perhaps that displeasure at those reforms that were passed in 2020 does remain, at least from that one poll. And you don't want to draw too much to it from a single poll, but you don't get a whole lot of polling in these sorts of state races. So you kind of got to work with what you got. How are you on the ground? What are some of the actions that you guys are taking with VCDL, with the PAC that you guys have to try and up that enthusiasm?
Yeah, well, the PAC has done. Has now gotten involved in not only the the General Assembly, but also local things that involve guns. Your city councils, town councils, things of that nature, and they've been made a big push to do a lot of endorsements all the way around to get people out to the polls to vote in all of these elections, even school boards, because they now can control gun policy to some degree on their own property. VCDL has been pushing vote, vote, vote. That's something we've been pushing over and over and over, and we'll continue to push till the election's over. We've been saying, a lot of people don't like this early voting where there's a 45 days to vote as opposed to an election day. We've pointed out to our members that, nope, if that's the way it is, then we need to take advantage of it. We need to use that change in law to our advantage by getting out early and getting our votes locked down, and not waiting till the day of the election when, who knows, another COVID outbreak could start and the polls are shut down or whatever. Vote now while you can. Well, you never know. You could be sick on that day. You could be out of town. So we're really pushing that, trying to get people to vote early. And many of them aren't used to it, but I think they'll get used to it.
Okay. And what are you seeing from other gun groups, both on either side? Every town has announced they're going to be spending significantly again in this election cycle. I don't know if they're going to get back to the levels they were in 2019, but they've already announced, I think, a $1.1 million ad buy in a House race that includes advertising and I believe get out the vote efforts. So what have you seen from the gun control groups to this point?
Well, all I've seen on like local television is the gun control being mentioned by the Democrats is one of the many issues. They don't tend to just focus on that. But I haven't seen a whole lot on the ground from them, but I'm sure there's the ads are probably waiting shortly before closer to the elections to really come out in force. They've got a lot of money behind them. I don't know if they have a strong grassroots base at all. We consider it AstroTurf, but they have money, and with that you can buy a lot of things. Sure.
How does it compare what you've seen so far to 2019 when I believe they were making record investments in trying to elect Democrats?
Well, you haven't seen that kind of stuff. In 2019, you actually had the governor coming out and saying, well, we're thinking about confiscating AR-15s and we're definitely thinking about banning them and blah, blah, blah. You don't hear that sort of strong rhetoric. What you typically hear is, this candidate is a MAGA candidate and has voted, to whatever. They come up with whatever, some kind of a vote thing, but it's not nearly as strong as it was in 2019.
Okay. And what about other gun rights groups? Obviously, there's been a lot going on with the NRA over the last couple of years. Have you? They had recently posted on their Institute for Legislative Action page that they're doing sort of grassroots efforts, door knocking, things like that. Have you seen a difference in their availability, the resources that they have at their disposal
I
for
know
this race?
I know that we've, I've personally seen postcards from them encouraging early voting and endorsing in the case where I live, Glenn Sturdivant. And I believe our PAC has endorsed him as well. But yeah, they've been pushing the early voting apparently.
Mm-hmm. Are you concerned at all about any lack of resource? Like, what are your major concerns going into this election? Do you see the same level of financial resources on the gun rights side that you're used to? Or are you seeing the same level of grassroots, door knocking and things of that nature? Are you guys able to produce that same level that you've had in years past?
Actually, well, maybe years past, but not matching what happened in 2019.
Is that just because 2019 was a gubernatorial election and this doesn't
I
have
think again the
mode?
strong push for gun control by the governor back then really lit up gun rights, gun owners, and so the PAC had very large contributions coming in. This year, it seems to be that all the various organizations that are like gun rights and some of the others that are I would say, I don't want to say we're a conservative organization, but that does tend to be where most of your support comes from.
Sure.
That a lot of the organizations are vying for the same money from the same people. So you're not seeing money at the same level that we saw back in 2019. So we don't have the same resources. We have less resources right now than we had in 2019. Of course, our main resources is VCDL is our membership. Getting out and getting them to vote, getting them to call, send emails, things like that.
Right. And do you think that, and you're seeing a bit less of that compared to 2019, at least, you think that's just sort of the complacency? The assault weapons ban didn't happen. That was sort of the big thing everybody was really concerned about, although obviously people were concerned about the other, red flag law and so forth as well.
And some of the crazy things that I've had to I've noticed out there is that people would be saying, well, we got a Republican governor.
Yeah.
And just sort of like, oh, okay, we're good now. We don't have to do anything. That's my biggest fear is that those people aren't going to wake up and say, yeah, but wait a minute, we can't do anything unless we have a trifecta of the House and the Senate and the governor. But it's amazing how many people just take that attitude of, well, it's not just stopping bad stuff; it's rolling back the bad stuff that we got. We've had got on the books since 2020, and a lot of it definitely needs to get rolled back.
Yeah, and speaking of which, let's look forward a bit past the election. Let's look at the two outcomes here. Either you're going to have divided government again because Republicans weren't able to capture those Senate seats, or even Democrats were able to take back the House or what have you, but Republicans retain control of the governorship, or you'll have a trifecta. Now, in the first scenario, that seems like it's probably pretty straightforward, and it's going to be pretty similar to how things have been going, which is not much done in the way of gun policy, right? Is that your expectation in that scenario?
Yeah, pretty much. If it's not a trifecta, then we're going to be at a stalemate. We should be able to block gun control, but we won't be able to roll back much of any significance. And that happens, our efforts are going to shift to the courts to go after a lot of these laws on constitutionality and just knock out a lot of the bad stuff from the court system. So we won't be dead in the water completely. But a far better way to handle this is through the legislature. That's way better. And that's why it would be very disappointing if we don't get a trifecta.
Right. Okay. And then if you do get the Republican trifecta, what do you think is realistic in terms of how gun policy would flow from there?
I think, I think the General Assembly, the Republican General Assembly and the pro-gun side understands how hated not having preemption at the local government level is. not being able to carry in state agencies like the ABC store or DMV, or even the General Assembly. We've historically always been able to carry there until 2020 and 2021, and now up through now. We'd like to see that reversed. Red flag laws up there as well. Now, because of that huge turnout in 2020, we did manage to really get the other side to backpedal on gun control quite a bit. As far as red flag laws go, Virginia's is probably the least egregious in the country because of the criteria in there, but it's still egregious. It's least egregious, it's less egregious, but it's still egregious. So that's high up on the list to repeal red flag. We have laws already to take care of the issue of what happens if somebody has a mental health crisis and controlling their access to guns during such a thing.
And something like the one gun a month restriction,
yes.
You think
one gun a month? I mean, our list is actually quite long, but at the top of the list were the things I listed: local gun control, government, state agency buildings, and so forth. Red flag laws. Yeah, one gun a month is another thing that gets people in trouble all the time because they don't. You don't know when you last bought a gun. A lot of times, you don't mean any harm, but or you want to buy two guns. Now you can't. You found the perfect gun, and you want to buy a backup for it, or you see two perfect guns. So a lot of people don't know that they're permit exemption from that either.
Yeah. And then obviously there's also the universal background check law.
Oh, yes.
Do you see that being something that could realistically
very much
be
I see
repealed?
something happening there because we've already have in the courts in Virginia now. VCDL managed to get a stay on 18 to 20-year-olds buying handguns being exempt. We got that exemption in. We've got to stay against it being enforced against them because the judge agreed it was unconstitutional. Somebody 18 to 20 there'd be no legal way for them in any way, shape, or form to get a handgun, to purchase one, even in a private sale. You can't buy one from a dealer. That's federal law. But federal law allows you to get a gun from a parent or a friend, anybody that's a third party. And this would have blocked that because everything would have had to go through the gun dealer. And under federal law, the gun dealer would have to say, sorry, I can't do the transfer. So we got that exempted. We're waiting for we actually brought up the whole universal background check in that lawsuit. So we're waiting for that to shape up. But I suspect that that's another one that we're going to be able to either amend or get rid of.
Interesting. Just because, obviously if you get a majority, it'll probably be a pretty thin majority in both houses. And Youngkin himself is a fairly moderate Republican. I don't know that he's really spoken very much on this issue. I mean, perhaps you could enlighten us, I guess, a little more on where you see Glenn Youngkin going with all this. Do you think he would actually sign the repeal of a red flag or universal background check bill?
Well, he's really an unknown because he's not been tested on any of this stuff. He's spoken pro-gun about things. I've not heard him talking about any gun control. So, but he's untested, to be fair. I mean, it's possible, but I think it would be unlikely that he would veto something like that. But you can never rule it out. But again, the Bruin ruling is something that we're going to be using quite a bit. If something's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. I certainly would hope he would back anything that's clearly unconstitutional.
And you think that'll be helpful when you're sort of lobbying these lawmakers, if you do get even sort of more moderate Republicans into some of these seats?
Sure.
You think that perhaps Bruin will help you?
We've got the win with City of Winchester, and we're going to be going after some more localities. The board has approved suing some more lawsuits going out there. So at least one other city in the near future is going to find themselves in the hot seat over parks and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. And you think those lawsuits will help you in the legislature as well?
Yes, because now you've got judges confirming that, this is unconstitutional. Let's go ahead and get it off the books. Let's not have unconstitutional laws on Virginia's books, which will only confuse citizens and maybe get the government sued and paying a lot of money when it shouldn't have been in the position to make that kind of mistake.
Interesting. And, I wanted to get your take on this real quick because, Virginia has this sort of reputation because we have these off-year elections. I think New Jersey has them as well, but not many states do, that oftentimes Virginia's elections can be viewed as a bellwether for the current president because they're kind of taken as a reflection on the president, how the president's doing, and often the opposing party will do well in Virginia elections. Do you think that holds for this sort of election? That usually gets talked about a lot with the gubernatorial elections and, who Virginia elects its governor. But, we don't have the governor up for election this time. We have the entire legislature, which is significant. But do you think that trend will still hold? Do you think that's a valid view, the way of looking at this from a national standpoint, these, state elections as a referendum kind of on Joe Biden?
I think it's a referendum on the policies of the gun control crowd, and in this case, the Democrats, is what the referendum is going to be on. I think gun owners will be looking at their gun rights and what's happening to that, to the increasing threat of illegal immigration coming in and what may be coming with them when we look at what happened in Israel. I think people are very much concerned about their security right now. And so I believe it's going to be a referendum on not only the Virginia legislature and what it's done in the past and what we needed to do, but what's going on federally, the assault on our rights generally, and the violence that we're seeing coming around various parts of the country. I haven't seen much in Virginia, and maybe that's because here over 750,000 people have concealed carry permits, but it could visit us at any time. And so I think overall it's a blend of the two. It's going to be an overall referendum on everything.
That's interesting. Yeah. So you see it both as people reacting to, especially with gun policy, to what Democrats passed in 2020, but also as kind of a barometer of how they're feeling about the president as well, who's also obviously been a very staunch gun control advocate, whose approval ratings are not very good at this point. Does that make you confident about the outcome of this election then?
Well, you can never be confident. I remember the talk of some massive red wave that was supposed to happen last election in Virginia, and it didn't happen. So you can never be overly confident about these things, but it certainly doesn't hurt that in a way, the president's overplayed his hand by quite a bit and continues to overplay his hand. And when you do that, on the gun control side, overplaying their hand, it definitely helps keep gun owners awake and alert and angry and fuel to fix this.
Okay, interesting. Well, so if people want to find out more about VCDL and what you guys are doing, your advocacy, where can they do that?
Yeah, sure. Our website is VCDL. That's as in Virginia Citizens Defense League, VCDL.org. There you can go up, you can join, you can donate if you wish. You can learn about Virginia's gun laws. You can see the candidate surveys. We survey all the candidates. You can see how they did in their surveys, whether they were pro-gun or anti-gun or whatever. You can see how the General Assembly votes. We rank our General Assembly members by every vote they take on guns. All kinds of good information up there. So yeah, feel free to visit. We're also on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on almost every platform out there. We've got some representation out there.
And do you guys have any events coming up soon?
For us, the big event that's coming up will be in January. That's the big one. That's going to be our lobby day. It's lobby day. That was when that massive over 50,000 people showed up in Richmond in 2020. It's always on the third Monday in January, which happens to be Martin Luther King Day. It's this year we're going to do our rally at 10 o'clock instead of 11. But we really want as many people as possible to come to Richmond and stand with us and lobby the General Assembly, and let's get this stuff fixed.
And I guess that's one of the other things you might try to address in if Republicans retake control, because then they ban guns from like the whole Capitol complex, didn't they?
Yes, they did, and that would be one of the things we would expect to be changed as soon as possible. It's like the Democrats knew they were going to lose. They've done a lot of this stuff through the governor, Northam. He had put up executive orders banning guns here and banning guns there. But in 2020, they codified that into law. So now certain things can only be undone in the General Assembly and not by policy.
Yeah. All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on. We'll have to have you on again down the line, maybe get an election recap or something like that.
Sure.
Just to judge how you guys
and
saw the election come out. But
we during the General Assembly too, could be a good time.
Yeah.
Talk about what's happening, what bills are in there, and what we're doing about them.
Yeah, certainly, because that's a story we will definitely be following, along with many other gun legislation stories in many other states. Obviously, these ones kind of personally affect me because I live in Virginia, but
and me.
But I try to prioritize all of the stories that could be interesting to a national audience, and I do think that Virginia has some unique features about it that do make it particularly interesting beyond my own inability to carry at the park in down the street in Alexandria where I live. So I do appreciate you coming on and giving us the lay of the land as you see it in the Virginia elections. We are going to head over to our news update now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the weekly news update. I'm contributing writer Jake Fogelman, joined as always by Reload founder Stephen Gutowski. How are we doing, Steve?
Oh, I'm a little bit disheveled. Anyone watching on YouTube is probably going to notice that we look different than in the second half of our news update today because, we had breaking news in the mass shooting story up in Maine and the manhunt there, which has now concluded. The shooter has been found dead by a self-inflicted gunshot wound, according to CNN. And so we wanted to make sure that we came back and re-recorded with some of these important latest details that weren't available when we initially recorded this. So, in the meantime, I changed my brakes and I probably don't look as fresh as I did when we recorded the second half of this because I'm very tired. Doing the car work is always one of those things where it's like, oh, this, it's not that hard to change brake pads. It's easier than doing your oil change most of the time. But you get halfway through and it's always little things and you forget how old you are. And you start to wonder if the time that you spent doing the job is worth the money that you saved. But those labor costs are really jumping up there lately at car shops. So I don't know. I like to think so, but I also bought, Flyers merch today after watching the Phillies implode. So there's something wrong with my decision making.
So your judgment is clearly needs to be questioned.
Yeah, maybe don't follow my lead on some of these things. But yeah, so this, a lot happened. I've been very busy with CNN as well, talking about this story, this terrible shooting in Maine, 18 people dead, 13 wounded. And then of course, this guy went on the run. We had done some reporting on this about his background, and you have a member's piece on how he may have avoided having his guns taken from him, given that he was hearing voices according to family members and that he had been committed over the summer. We have learned also recently from CNN, actually this one's from Bearing Arms, I believe, that that he was a prohibited person, likely because of that mental health commitment. And also that CNN has reported that he bought his guns before that mental health commitment, so probably before he became prohibited. But we'll get into that in a little bit. The big update is that he has been found dead, and so the threat is over, which is good news for anyone living in Maine. I'm thankful that it didn't drag on because it obviously had the potential to drag out for much longer and have people living through just an awful state of stress and fear very similar to what I went through a couple weeks back, as we talked about on the show, when there was the escaped murder in Pennsylvania that ended up right near my mother's farm. So I'm glad that part of this is over for everyone else up in Maine.
Yeah, no, certainly. It was definitely a harrowing situation. They, from what we've seen from reports, they almost locked the town down, the community down. There were several nights, at least last night, where they were, calling out to people's homes in a separate city where they believed his family lived or where his family was from. And so clearly it was just an anxiety-inducing, nerve-wracking ordeal for the last, 48 hours or whatever it's been. And we're thankful that no one else was harmed in finding this guy. Yeah. And no officers were harmed, and thankfully that part's all over.
That is the most important part of that manhunt aspect of this story. That no one else was harmed after he carried out his terrible attack to begin with. And he had a rifle. He could have. That was one of the big fears with the Pennsylvania convict who escaped. That he eventually found a way to get a rifle, and that gave him the ability to hurt someone from distance, right? And this, in the Pennsylvania case, that was a .22 rifle, so it's a less powerful firearm with less capability. And in this case, it was an AR-15, a .308 actually turned out from the latest reporting at CNN as well. So that's a firearm that's capable of significant distance shooting, commonly used for deer hunting, things of that nature. So, it's something that cartridge is commonly used for deer hunting, but it's something that is, that adds a level of concern to the whole situation. And there were reports that he was some sort of firearms instructor. The military said he was not a military firearms instructor. So, we updated our piece on that point because the initial police bulletin claimed he was a military firearms instructor. Whether he was some sort of civilian firearms instructor is unclear still, but the indication was that he was trained and he had a very capable firearm, a rifle that can reach out to distance. So it was an added layer of concern for anyone in the area. And now, thankfully, that concern can be lifted. And unfortunately, they are still left to grieve for the terrible situation. I mean, this is 18 people killed in a state where they have 20 to 25 murders a year. So one incident has put them near their yearly total, which is very hard to comprehend, I think, if you're not from Maine. And so, our hearts, our prayers go out to them for sure. But I do want to also talk about why this shooting should have been prevented, right? You wrote a piece on this for members where you looked at both the federal law on mental health commitments and firearms, as well as Maine's version of the red flag law, which has gotten some criticism in the wake of this attack. But can you just walk us through those details of why this guy very likely should have been prevented from having these firearms that he used?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you pointed out at the top of the show, I wrote this piece before we actually got news confirmation that he was in fact listed as a prohibited person. At least the state police had him listed as a prohibited possessor. But from the details that we did know, for example, from that bulletin that you mentioned, and confirmation later from the Associated Press that he was in fact committed to a mental institution for at least 2 weeks earlier this summer. It sounds like in July.
By the police too, right?
But yeah, by the police. That was actually confirmed by an anonymous source that was not authorized to speak. So divulged that the state police had actually escorted him to this mental facility after he was acting erratically during some training with his Army Reserve unit. And so federal law, one of the prohibiting offenses under federal law is whether you've been either A, adjudicated mentally deficient by a judge, or B, involuntarily committed to a mental institution. And that is a lifetime prohibition on even being able to possess firearms. You can't purchase firearms. So that right there is just a permanent prohibiting offense or prohibiting category.
Yeah. And I think it's important to emphasize this point because for whatever reason in media and online, and you're seeing this a lot from the gun control groups as well, their main focus on the mental health aspect of this has been on red flag laws, I guess, because people have heard of these in recent years. They've been in the spotlight, and they've been advocated for as a mental health response mechanism to take someone's guns away. But the thing is that that's a temporary order. It only lasts for up to a year. And I guess a lot of people aren't as aware of the federal prohibition for anyone who's been involuntarily committed, which, as you mentioned there, is a lifetime prohibition. So I don't know why there's so much focus on the red flag aspect of this, although you can give us the rundown of how it works in Maine and whether it could have applied here. But because the bigger question is the involuntary commitment. I mean, that matters much more because it means you will never be able to own a firearm and you aren't even allowed to possess them for the rest of your life. So that's a much more severe restriction than even a red flag law can provide. And it's also one that has been on the books for decades.
Right.
And is really fairly uncontroversial. I'm sure there's some concerns, like with a lot of these lifetime prohibitions, over, the potential to have your rights restored if you are able to be rehabilitated. This is something that comes up with felon in possession laws and a lot of these prohibited person categories. But for the most part, it's something that everybody agrees on, that somebody who is hearing voices, that has made threats to against their military installation that they served at. Now, he was in the Army Reserves. He was never deployed in combat. That's an important point to make. But he had apparently made threats on base. And so that kind of person, I think it's almost universally agreed, should not have firearms. And so, you're talking about this area of law that is well established and should have been able to prevent this attack, but didn't. But in a lot of the focus has been on these red flag laws, and Maine's version of it that is that's different enough that people call it a yellow flag law. Can you just walk us through what it is and why it's different?
Yeah. So like you said, it's called the yellow flag law to kind of differentiate it. I don't know that it's really all that different from actual red flag laws. So the big key distinction is Maine's law is limited to only law enforcement officers can initiate it. Other red flag statutes usually will allow law enforcement and family members, is usually the bare minimum. And then some are much more permissive in who they allow to initiate. But Maine is only law enforcement. And then the other big distinction that's unique to Maine's is that before the matter can even be petitioned to a judge, police that initiate this proceeding have to take the person into protective custody and then bring them to have a professional medical evaluation of their mental state. And then that professional medical person will then either sign off or say, no, I don't want to initiate this proceeding. And then they take it to a judge. And then it's pretty much the same as it is with every other red flag statute, where they issue a confiscation order.
Right. And so it sounds pretty similar. There's maybe one more layer of, due process protections, honestly, involved. But in this case, it sure seems like if somebody had wanted to use that law in this situation, they could have, right?
Yeah. And that's the case I kind of make in my piece, is that from the details that we do know, from the reporting we do have, that certainly sounds like every component of that yellow flag law was met along the way, where you have apparently the state police were the ones that took him, A, and then B, to a mental facility where he was, I guess, committed for a period of 2 weeks. So clearly some sort of mental health evaluation was done over this time period. And that's the criteria right there for the yellow flag law. So it just sounds like it just never was. I don't know if the police just decided against initiating one or if it didn't come to mind, but it certainly sounds like the criteria was met. So I think a lot of the criticisms of Maine's law maybe are a little unfounded in this instance, at least what we know so far, because it certainly sounds like this conduct would be covered under Maine's yellow flag statute.
Yeah, it feels like this should have been covered in multiple ways, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the main one being the federal statute that makes involuntary commitments a prohibitory offense for life.
And that could very well be
the top one.
And that could very well be why he was listed under the state police's database as a prohibited person. We don't know for sure whether the link is confirmed yet, but it certainly seems like it.
Yeah. And, we're still in initial reports phase. These are sources, giving some detail to CNN reporters, which, I trust is true, but you're, like you said, it's still early and we don't have official word on these things yet. But all that sure seems to line up to, you would suspect, that he was prohibited because of this commitment that he experienced. now, there's lots of questions around this beyond just why his guns weren't taken away. I mean, it does seem like perhaps that's the most probable situation. Again, we don't know for sure, and we don't like to speculate too much, but it does seem the most probable thing that happened here is became prohibited, but either there was a breakdown in some sort of communication between the federal background check system and state authorities or what have you, or just that local and state authorities didn't follow up to actually confiscate firearms. Because it's one thing for somebody to be prohibited, for the possession of guns to be illegal for them, and it's another thing to actually follow through and take whatever firearms they might have away from them. That is another issue altogether. If you're going to have the system as it's currently designed to function properly, there has to be that follow through on the local end. Like somebody has to actually go and interact, which is to be fair, is a very dangerous thing. Taking someone's firearms away because they have been found to be incompetent, or they've been voluntarily committed, or for whatever reason, that if they're a criminal, if a convicted felon who's been convicted of a violent felony or something like that, it can be very dangerous to try and take guns away from somebody like that, obviously. But it's essential, right, to prevent situations like this. And unfortunately, it seems it didn't happen here. And now, 18 people are dead. So, that is the latest information we have as of this point, Friday night. But we'll keep you guys updated as if anything more comes out. We'll obviously be staying on top of this story as best we can. But we wanted to make sure that we got on and re-recorded this to just to get these three big pieces of news out that broke, in the period after we initially recorded. So, but we're going to head right on back to old Jake and old Steve for the the rest of the news update now. So thank you guys. What else we have going on this week? I know it was a pretty busy week, news-wise.
Absolutely. So some of the links that we have in the newsletter, the weekly newsletter, we have another interesting piece from Jeff Asher over at his Substack. This time he's taken a look at the ATF's crime trace data that they released. I guess they quietly released it. He makes a point that they very quietly released it this year. And he makes a point that it's fairly incomplete. They don't go into a lot of granularity, which is fairly common with these crime trace reports. But the top line that he took away is that the amount of crime guns that they recovered for 2022 is actually up 10%. And that the time to crime, which is the time that they trace from when a gun was legally purchased to when it was recovered in a crime, is on a multi-year downward slope. So it used to average over 10 years, and now we're hovering at around 6 years for time to crime. So this is some of the two interesting takeaways.
It went back up.
It ticked up slightly,
in 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of odd. There's a lot. His piece is really interesting, and I think there's a lot of good data in there. But also it's hard to draw concrete conclusions from it, other than, a few things like we've seen a lot more guns recovered by the FBI. Of course, the ATF also has a disclaimer that not every traced gun is actually used in a crime, and not every crime gun is recovered and traced. So, there's some limitations to this data to begin with. But yeah, it's been interesting to see the number of guns increase significantly over the past 10 years that they've recovered. That's sort of in line because the 2022 is a little bit behind, where we are right now. Although 2022, the FBI found that murder decreased significantly, right? One of the most significant decreases in murder in a long time. And it was like 6%. And so it's odd to see guns still being recovered at a higher rate, that they didn't see a drop off in crime gun tracing during that time period when you saw a significant decline in murder, because most murders are committed with firearms in the United States. Not all of them, of course, but most of them are. And, so that's a bit odd. It's a bit odd that the time to crime has gone back up. It's been decreasing, like he said, for a while. And it is troubling because it means that firearms are making their way into the criminal market faster than they used to. And, law enforcement trying to figure out why that is going to be, I think, a very important thing. But at the same time, that phenomenon reversed a little bit in 2022. It'll be interesting to see if that continues. Because obviously, a lot of the context here is that there's a huge buying wave in 2020, 2021. So you had a lot of new guns on the market, and at least some of them ended up getting to crime scenes faster. Presumably, we're talking about averages here, so we don't, like he mentions in the piece, you don't know exactly like how many guns are 1 or 2 years old, but if the average is going down, it presumably means that more of them being traced are newer firearms. So, it raises a lot of questions. Certainly, it doesn't give you a ton of answers, unfortunately. As he notes, it's not like a super simple takeaway from all this. Even the breakdown of source guns or whatever is not straight red and blue based on the gun laws in each state. So it would be, I think, interesting. Maybe we'll have to have him on and go through some of the numbers and how he interprets them. But the biggest takeaways to me were that there are a lot more crime guns than there were 10 years ago. At least there's a lot more traces. And that could also just be more capacity at the ATF to do traces. It's hard exactly to say. You would think it's more that they are recovering more firearms, but they don't give you that information in the report as far as I can tell. And then, the decrease in time to crime. Because, if you're getting from 10 years to like 6 years, something is occurring where criminals are able to get guns from the legal market faster than they used to. And there's also averages versus, how you look at the data. Is an average the right approach for that to figure out, how many new guns are making it to the criminal market faster? But either way, I think the broad overview is that, time to crime has gone a little bit back up. So I guess maybe there's fewer new guns making it into the market than there were in 2020 and 2021. That's, I guess, but the long-term trend is a bad one.
Absolutely. And then the last story we're going to talk about is one that we actually covered. New York City is back in the news again for a law being struck down as unconstitutional. And it's very similar to the law that the Supreme Court actually nixed in Bruin. For their purchase permits, they had what was a good moral character or good cause requirement for folks that were applying to possess both long guns and handguns in the city. And this individual that challenged this law had a pretty extensive history of traffic violations, and he had 2 previous arrests back in the 90s that were, no charges came about, or he never served anything. They were dismissed. But he was denied multiple times for possession permits because of that, because they said he lacked good moral character. And a federal judge just said that was unconstitutional.
Yeah, I don't know if any listeners have maybe heard this story before, but it's basically identical to the Bruin.
Right.
Right. I mean, you're talking about the same exact concept at play. Now, this is New York City instead of New York State, but yeah, you're basically denying people the ability to buy a gun because a government official decides that they don't have a good reason. And that can mean anything the government official wants it to, basically. In this case, it's this guy's a bad driver. I mean, he seems to be quite a bad driver,
right?
To be fair, with the number of license suspensions he's racked up over the years. But and then they list his arrests. I don't know how you can even put something like that. These are arrests where no convictions happened. The charges were dismissed. It's not. How can it even be considered part of his record for this? As you would think would be a big concern for any civil libertarian. It's okay, you're arrested for something, but if you're not convicted of that thing, or you don't have some sort of plea deal that puts it in your permanent record or something, it's I don't even know how you can bring that up as part of your evaluation for whether somebody can exercise a constitutionally protected right by buying, a firearm. So, yeah, it's not surprising that this law got struck down. If anything, it's a little surprising that they bothered to continue to enforce this instead of trying to pass something else that might have some chance of standing up in court, because it's just one of those things where you're just doing exactly the same thing as what the courts, at least these, we've talked a lot about these Bruin response laws, right? And how they sure don't seem like they're going to stand up to judicial scrutiny because they, in so many different ways, they violate the letter and heart of the Bruin ruling by just trying to make it so people can't actually carry guns. But at least they're doing it in some different way from what the court directly ruled on, right? Like, they're trying to use sensitive places and just be extremely expansive about it. No, the court did say you can't do that, but they haven't specifically talked about every sensitive place that these new laws apply to. So in this case, it's like, the good reason clause, that's exactly what they thought was wrong with New York's gun carry regime. Like this is exactly the same thing. It's just applied to gun ownership instead of gun carry, which, might be even more protected in the eyes of some justices, I think. But regardless, it didn't work. And it's just another one of these phenomenons of lawmakers being willing to throw money away, chasing these cases for political reasons. It seems like, because they just have no chance of winning this, honestly. You can't deny someone their Second Amendment rights because they have parking violations or, traffic violations or whatever, unless it leads to a serious felony or something. This guy doesn't have anything like that. So
one thing that I think is interesting too, you mentioned, it's similar to Bruin, and the Bruin response bills have kind of been a little craftier, you might say, in their ways to evade Bruin.
At least,
a little bit,
minorly.
But good moral character you have seen come up in a lot of these Bruin response bills. That was sort of the whole
That's true.
background with New York's, like, you have to give your social media accounts to the application officer and that sort of thing. Was they were getting at very similar things. And I believe California and Massachusetts also have a similar good moral. Now, I don't think they articulate exactly what that means to have good moral character, but that could very well end up getting them in hot waters, like you see with this judge.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That hasn't been the focus of a lot of these laws, but
right. It's mostly been the sensitive places, but
yeah, they do have some of these good moral character things. They tend to be a little more expansive, than what this New York City one was. But yeah, that's a fair point. And it's just part of this trend of disregarding what's going to happen in court and ignoring strategic litigating. Like, this is the thing. Like, you can understand that these lawmakers and I'm sure a lot of voters as well in these areas just don't like what the Supreme Court has ruled. But it seems like the worst possible strategy to just try and ignore it and do whatever you want. Like, it just seems like you'd be better off trying to come up with some alternative strategy to deal with this situation instead of just, we're going to pass this stuff anyway and pay money to defend it when we're going to lose. I don't know. Seems odd, but we'll keep following it, of course, to see how it all plays out. Whether maybe we're wrong, maybe this will all stand in court. Well, at the end of the day, I would bet anything against that. But you never know. Anyway, that's all we've got for this week. So if you guys appreciate this sort of reporting and you want to support it, you can head on over to thereload.com and buy a membership today. Of course, you will also get access to hundreds of pieces of exclusive analysis and stories that you won't find anywhere else, including Jake's piece that we discussed on the show today. And you'll also get this show a day early. You'll get access a day early. You'll have the opportunity to appear on the show in a member segment. And you'll also have commenting privileges on the website. You'll get an extra newsletter every Sunday that gives you a deeper look at the issues of the week and keeps you up to date on what is going on with guns in America. So we will see you guys again real soon.